it's already 10 minutes late, so I think that all the people that wanted to come, they have the opportunity to come. Thank you, all of you, for being here. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to Carlos Puchol, who is a former student from this school and a successful entrepreneur in the USA. And he will present about his professional trajectory in a few moments. So thank you very much. And
thank you, Miguel. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today. I haven't been here in quite a little while, and things have changed quite a bit. I'll be talking a little bit about, Miguel asked me to present a little bit of what my background is, a little bit of the history of what things that I have been doing over the years. And feel free to ask any questions anytime, or if you have anything that catches your curiosity, let me know. I'll be talking a little bit about the more academic path at the beginning that I took. Then I'll be talking a little bit about research in industry, and then more applied research, R&D, and then an entrepreneurial phase that I've had more recently. I'm originally from Gandia, here in Valencia. I went to Formación Profesional in electronics, and then after that I came to El Poli for doing computer science in sistemas físicos. I don't know if that exists today as it is. Same. So I did a 3-year degree first, La Técnica, and my project was actually a system to control and monitor and control ripening chambers for citrus fruits, and at that time it was actually fairly new. And it turns out that this, it turns out that there's quite a bit of science to actually get fruits to the consumers somewhere in Europe at the right time with the right ripening, so that they have good quality product. So we actually enhanced the capabilities of some of these companies to actually deliver product on time. This actually became a business venture of the company that sponsored this project, and this venture actually continues today. I was quite pleased to learn, actually. After that, I did a licenciado degree here, and my project was with Francisco Garza Cuberta in speech recognition and neural networks. After that, this is the embarrassing slide of the presentation. I got a prize, national prize, along with Emilio Camahort. Actually, you see, we both obtained first and second prize from here at the university. After that, I had a Rotary International Scholarship to go to the University of Texas at Austin in computer science. The intention was to do a master's, but then one thing led to another. I started publishing a little bit more and ended up doing a PhD in computer science. The specialty there was embedded systems and real-time systems. Most of it was actually not so much software in and of itself, was technologies around software, such as formal verification and validation of software. After that, I was actually lucky enough to have a chance to go to Bell Labs. At the time, it was owned by AT&T, and so we had some joint projects with the university. And this was kind of a continuation of the PhD work, which was in mathematical foundations of software engineering, and as well as applications of software verification. Mostly for things that actually still work today, which are telephone switches. There's more and more next-generation switches, but the old telephone switches are still working today. These are pretty special machines at the time, especially because the average uptime of one of these machines is basically, the average downtime of one of these machines is about an average of 1 minute a year. And that includes software upgrades. And it takes about 12 minutes to reboot or power cycle one of these machines. So it tells you that on average, one of these machines had one reboot every 12 years. Okay, pretty kind of special kind of software. After that, or as part of this, we had a chance to work on, at this point, the web was coming in, things like XML were coming in, and there were no technologies to actually communicate things like voice menus or voice XML, what eventually became voice XML, commands. So actually we invented this concept of voice XML, and actually many people in the world use this system today. You probably all have used it when you call a system and you're offered a prompt. Press 1 if you want, customer service. Press 2 if you want something else. Nowadays, most systems in the world are implemented with this voice XML. Originally, it was done with other technologies, and later it became pretty much commoditized to be in voice XML. The company is now, AT&T has become something else, and Lucent Technologies is now part of Alcatel, owned in France. Okay. After that, I had a chance to go to a company called Transmeta. I was very much interested. I was doing a little bit of research, but I was very much interested in things like Linux and open source. I have been doing open source for quite a while. And I had a chance to join the advanced development team advanced projects team at Transmeta. Transmeta today does not exist, but at the time it was quite a famous company. We did actually early work on core virtualizations. And what Transmeta did was very power efficient chips. I actually brought a couple of chips that I worked on. This was the very first one that we worked on. And this eventually became the pioneering work that was done for power management. What brought the whole industry, including Intel and AMD, to actually adopt strong power management techniques so that people have long battery life on PCs and laptops. The second generation I'll show you in a little bit. Transmeta was also famous for employing a pretty well-known person, which was the founder of Linux, Linus Torvalds. And so that kind of was also pretty attractive to me, that I had a chance to work with a person like him. Actually, my first project at Transmeta was a secret project at the time to boot the 64-bit kernel, the AMD version of the 64-bit kernel from AMD. Physically, the companies there are very next to each other in California and Silicon Valley. I didn't mention that, by the way, but it was in the title of the presentation, so you got an idea. So my first project there at Transmeta was actually a slightly very secretive project where AMD wanted to actually run 64-bit kernels on this chip before they even actually had a chip running. Because Transmeta implemented a chip that was actually based on software, you could essentially change the microcode fairly quickly. So what we did was actually we implemented the 64-bit instruction set from AMD on the software that eventually was coming into this chip. And for the very first time ever, we were able to boot the x86-64 kernel before even AMD had silicon. And so we actually found bugs way ahead of its time. The important thing about this was that they could actually now build machines. They were not very fast machines. They were running at 300 megahertz or something like that, but enough to actually be able to bring up a system with a real hard drive, not really in simulation, real hard drive, real screen, real keyboard, real devices, USB, and so forth. And so these systems were actually brought into companies like Red Hat, SUSE, even Microsoft to implement 64-bit Linux, well ahead of the silicon. And so they could actually have a very faithful implementation of the instruction set before the hardware was deployed. At this time, if you know a little bit of history of computing, at this time, Intel had a 64-bit architecture that was kind of flying high. It was extremely, very large. It was a huge project. It was called Itanium. And eventually it was known as Titanic, because essentially, it was so big and so large that then AMD came a little bit from behind with a very compelling 64-bit architecture that was already running Linux. So, 64-bit Linux, was ideal for the enterprise and for data centers. So, in effect, what they did was, through Linux, they actually got by, Intel in that kind of leap, into the 64-bit architecture. Eventually, Intel had to essentially swallow their pride and implement the AMD version of the instruction set. But in the meantime, Transmeta, we actually changed fabrication techniques from IBM to Taiwan. TSMC was the fab there. And Transmeta eventually didn't really make it big because Intel came with a very compelling product based on Pentium 3, not based on the existing architecture that they had at the time. And they did very well against Transmeta. I don't know if you guys know this person. Anybody recognize him? Linus Torvalds. So this is at my house in California. This is my wife over here, Maite, my kids, some friends also from Transmeta. They're at Google now, his wife and their daughters. So we had a little bit of Valencia in California. After that, I had a chance to essentially understand a little bit power management in the PC world very early on. And so I became very acquainted with these technologies, which really not very many people knew at the time, even within Silicon Valley. A lot of these technologies are really controlling things like, I don't know if you guys know what PLLs are, phase lock loops, or essentially electronics or voltage regulators to actually manage the frequency and the voltage so that there's very low power usage, all through software, all controlled through software. So after that, Transmeta didn't fare very well against the competition from Intel, and I had a chance to spend some time at NVIDIA. And so at NVIDIA, I was responsible for building chips that were power efficient so that they could earn business in the laptop space. Because originally, NVIDIA has traditionally been very strong in very high performance, especially for gamers, people who play games or do simulations with high-end graphics, that sort of thing. But they were essentially very not very efficient, power-wise. And so my job was to kind of help the efforts of the company towards making their chips more efficient. After that, I was bit by the entrepreneurial bug, being in Silicon Valley. Essentially, I wanted to start my own company, or at least I wanted to know how to start a company and go very early on, within a company. And I had a chance to. I had an offer to become hardware architect for the MacBook line of laptops before actually the week before they switched into x86, when they announced that they were switching into Intel. However, there was a small company called Montalvo Systems that were building a new CPU, also going against Intel and AMD. And I felt that this company had some chances to actually make a difference. At this company, even though the company was eventually acquired by Sun Microsystems, which is now part of Oracle, the company itself did very well because we had patents on virtualization of cores. We had patents on power management. We have patents on leakage control. You guys are mostly software people, so maybe you know some of these techniques. But essentially what it means is controlling the different aspects of the hardware, through software. The next thing, I actually started a company here in Gandia, and it was a franchise of essentially Wi-Fi ISPs. And so the idea was to actually have essentially an ISP in a box that mom-and-pop shops could actually sell. The company did okay, but we eventually sold it. We didn't make very well. But we eventually sold it and started another company called Amahi, which is what I'm working on these days. But in the meantime, when a company doesn't have anything going on, I started also consulting on the side for other startups in Silicon Valley. Thankfully, things are okay there in terms of business. And so I was able to work for several companies. A company called C-Switch, who was implementing, again, chips that were very, very large. They were actually roughly 6 times the size of this chip. And it was an FPGA. I don't know how many people, do anybody know what an FPGA is? A field programmable gate array. It's basically a software-controlled, essentially it's logic that can be essentially burned into the chip and can perform any application that one can come up with. Okay, but actually the software, the work was actually software related, and so but it's also a little bit along the same lines of software and hardware interaction. Okay. The next one, actually, the next company I worked for was DS2, was actually here in Valencia, although I was working remotely, from California. If you guys don't know what DS2 was, DS2 was recently acquired by Marvell, which is another chip manufacturer. And so Marvell is actually a worldwide leader in power line communications. So this is kind of like an emerging, business. What it is communicating data where you plug one device at one end of, say, of your house or of your, of a building, and then at the other end of a building or at the end of the house, you plug the same device, and then you have Ethernet on both sides, and you essentially have connectivity between the two locations. This company is not very well known around here, I gather, but it's actually a worldwide leader. And I have to say, I was extremely impressed with this company here in Valencia. A lot of people here are from this school and from Teleco. This was very, very impressive company, actually. Not only they did very well, they actually drove the standards from IEEE, drove the standards from ITU. So this is actually, world-class work being done right here in Valencia. It's a very, very, very good company. They actually, what they do is they build a chip, but essentially inside the chip, a lot of what they do is essentially DSP. So it's all software. Another company that I work for, I think Miguel mentioned that you have some project going on with them, turns out, is Splashtop. I see. I thought you had something, some project or something. It's a company that has one of the leading applications for what is known as a pre-boot environment. You may have seen it on IBM or Lenovo laptops, Acer laptops, or Asus laptops, where the system actually can boot to a Linux environment where you have a number of things like Firefox, Skype, and the basic utilities to actually browse the web within 4 seconds of pressing the power button. And then in the background, you can actually boot Windows XP or Windows 7 or whatever you're running in your system, but you have very quick access for basic functionality on your system. So that's one line of business. The other line of business is remote desktop. They actually have one of the leading applications for the iPad to do remote desktop. They're based in Cupertino, but they also have offices in Taiwan and China. So feel free to ask any questions anytime. I'll talk a little bit about Amahi, which is something that I'm doing at the moment. So what Amahi is essentially software. This is something that I've been doing, started as a hobby for me. I've been doing essentially most of my life, as soon as I had a little bit of experience with Linux. And so I've always had a server at home. And so typically I would use it to download things like many people do, to have BitTorrents, to have different applications. We had at one point, we had a wiki at home, a small wiki, where we used, we stored documents, from the school, like, I don't know, the things that get communicated by email. within the family. I don't know. I have 2 kids, and they have schedules. They have school schedules. They play soccer. They play, at some point they were doing different sports. And so keeping all that information kind of straight was something that we're using through file sharing and through small applications. One day I realized that perhaps I'm always a little bit ahead of the market, and I thought, well, perhaps this is an opportunity that eventually will come to the rest of the world. And I thought, I'm just going to quit my job, and I'm going to focus on this, and in the meantime also, spend some time, consulting. So essentially, the idea was that just like you have, phones where you download applications, I saw that in the future you will have gateways, routers, and access points that will have storage. They may have things like tuners. They may have things like maybe Wi-Fi access points. Of course, they do, many of them today. You will have things like, RAID controllers. You will have, some kind of maybe encryption to, keep some files safe. And then I thought, well, in addition of all that, of course, a big component is having multimedia things. As networks or the digital home is becoming more and more mainstream, you have 3, 4, 5 screens on any given home. And especially now you have tablets, you have phones that, have a very sizable screen, and you want to actually watch movies from there. You want to be able to enjoy, your entertainment from anywhere in the house, whether it's a TV in the living room or a TV in the bedroom or, anywhere. So essentially, the best way that I've found to describe Amahi here is like a disco multimedia, which is the name that people usually use here, except Amahi is not really designed to have a front end. The front end could be the TV that has most TVs today, most modern TVs today have something that is known a Dlna server, a Dlna client. Most Android phones today also have a Dlna client. So these things automatically detect Dlna servers in the home and what media files you have in the home. Therefore, it's very, very easy to actually consume your entertainment. So I felt like, just like people have water storage in their home, a water tank, and people have, a gas tank, or people have a digital home today, but there's really no central point in the home to actually manage all these things. So I felt like maybe perhaps there was an opportunity there. And it started essentially as a hobby. I started putting it on the web as open source, and then we essentially created a community behind it. And once we started opening up the ability to add applications modularly, it kind of took off. So we have about 40,000 people all over the world, and I think it's installed in like 35 countries, and now it's being translated to 24 languages. More recently, we started actually charging for some of the apps, a very small amount, for some of the more popular apps, and also have a revenue model for cloud storage. So essentially, some areas within the home, within the file server, can actually be synced with the web. If you guys, does anybody know what a Dropbox is? So you guys use Dropbox. So essentially, what we have is a similar thing to Dropbox, where some of your files are actually synced with the cloud. And so some people want to be able to say, I store my family pictures, my tax documents. So if the server gets stolen, or there's a fire, there's a disaster or something, or the hardware fails for some reason, there's an area that can be safely retrieved online. And so thankfully, people seem to be interested in this, and they're paying for these applications and for this subscription. And we're kind of within this niche. We kind of have become a little bit of a leader. We had a competition from Microsoft with a product called Windows Home Server, and it turns out that a number of people from that community, from Windows Home Server, have actually come to Amahi, and we have enjoyed the fact that perhaps maybe they didn't execute so well, and we're happy to take those customers from them. You can ask any questions about this. I can expand areas that you may be interested in. I don't have much more other than this kind of diagram where you can see that Amahi is basically a layer on top of Linux, and we actually did not want to reinvent the wheel. We didn't really want to have our own version of Linux because that's a lot of work. We wanted to actually use an existing platform that was already successful. And so we chose Fedora first, and actually we have a new version now coming up with both Fedora and Ubuntu, which are the more popular Linux distributions. So what Amahi is essentially a platform on top that can run both Linux applications and some native Amahi apps. More details. Amahi is actually based on Ruby on Rails. Anybody know Ruby on Rails or heard of Ruby on Rails? It's a new platform. Probably you have heard of PHP a little bit more, some of you. And so PHP is one of the more popular frameworks. Ruby on Rails is actually a next generation framework. So Amahi is based on Ruby on Rails, and we hope to actually have a new release with many more applications in the coming in the coming weeks or the coming months. I think that's basically the kind of introduction of the talk, and I would like to take any questions from you. Go ahead. Okay, I thought you were going to ask a question. Oh, okay. How many people use Linux? Android.
Android, for example, is how we can implement the home server features into these phones.
So actually we have, so Amahi, a lot of the interaction within Amahi is actually web-based. And we have a few applications. In particular, I mentioned one of the applications, this one is called HTML5. That's a next generation HTML that is becoming the standard. And actually you can do streaming right from certain HTML elements. So what that means is that you don't actually need an app in the phone to be able to interact and stream the media. You can actually stream straight from the browser in the phone, whether it's Safari on iOS or the equivalent of Chrome is basically WebKit on Android. So the idea is that you can actually do file sharing. Say, for instance, if you're going to be offline, you can actually take some of the files, take them with you on the phone. You can use, for instance, Dropbox or the equivalent of Dropbox. Move the files physically to the phone if you're going to be offline, and then enjoy the movie or enjoy the music while you're offline. What you can also do, one of the features, I haven't really gone too much into detail into Amahi, but one of the big features in Amahi is a VPN. It's a virtual private network. So you can actually remote connect from, if you're through 3G or 4G, you can actually VPN into your home network, and it just feels like you're at home. And you can actually stream your data or listen to your music while you're on the road. Does that make sense? I don't know if sorry? So the more typical apps would be Dlna. Have anybody heard of Dlna or know what Dlna is? A lot of people, if you have an Android phone, you probably have a Dlna client on it. Dlna is a standard from Sony to do streaming over a network. So Dlna is probably the most popular application. Dlna, for instance, let me put an example. If you have an Amahi server at home and you have, say, a PS3, in the video section of the PS3, you will be able to see Amahi, and then all the movies that you have and all the music that you have in your Amahi server are visible in the TV through the PS3, and you can play them. If you have an Xbox, you can run, or many of the Blu-ray devices today, multimedia drives, have actually a DLNA browser. So basically, they can see the network. A lot of these guys are connected on the network, and they can actually see the media. Not many people necessarily know the name DLNA, but essentially is media streaming essentially over the network. So that's probably the most popular application. The second most popular application is an iTunes server. So you can put all your music in one place, and every iTunes device in the home can actually stream the music. So it allows you to actually search the music and whatnot, and then stream it. Another application that is very popular is called Videos5. It's an HTML5 streaming browser for your network. So you can actually go with an iPad, visit a web page within your home network, and then start streaming all your movies. So again, the idea is you centralize all the things that you have in your home, your digital life, so to speak, and then you have consumers, which are all the different clients, whether they are iPads, tablets, TVs, Xboxes, PS3s, or any laptops or net tops. We also have one of the things that happened, in part being thanks to being open source, was that we made it very easy to integrate applications that are typically not found on desktop systems. So for instance, what we call productivity applications. So it could be things like a WordPress blog. You can install it with one click. And so you can actually select the blog, install, click and install, and then next thing you know, the blog is working. You don't need to actually do all the details that have to go through to actually install a blog, a web server, a blog engine, and so forth. Same thing with CMS, content management systems, like Drupal. Probably you have heard of Drupal. It's very popular here. Things like I think Joomla is another very popular one as well. Very, very easy to install. So the idea is that Amahi will be useful not only for the homes, but also for small businesses. And so right now, we have a problem where we have too many applications. It was a little bit too popular. We ended up with 350 applications. And people are telling us that's too many applications. We need a way to say, for instance, a profile. If I'm a home user, I want to see the applications that are more useful for the home. If I'm a small business user, I want to see the applications that are more more friendly for a small business. So it could be, a wiki, a small document management system for a company that, for instance, does requests, for, budgets or bills, or, someone who needs to actually track documents that they get out, or they get from outside. There's many applications to do that. Enterprise applications as well, enterprise resource tracking. There's many applications. We have I believe we actually have one of the largest, if not the largest, repository of applications that are installable with a single, one-click solution today. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to go to there's a company here, I believe it's called Wuxter. It's a multimedia vendor here in Spain who's interested in integrating that. There's another one called Thrustmaster and Hercules. here in Europe as well, who we're talking to. There's another one called Seagate. Probably you have heard of Seagate. Seagate is the largest manufacturer of hard drives in the world. And so we're working with them to bring Amahi into essentially next-generation gateway devices, next-generation routers. The router space, my feeling is the router space has been very boring for a long, long time, and we need something interesting, happening there. So I set out to maybe make a difference there. Today, sorry. Correct. So we support 3 architectures, x86 and 32-bit, x86 and 64-bit, and plug computer. The plug computer is a small device that looks like a wall power adapter, and it's actually built by Marvell, and the architecture is being promoted by Marvell. And we have a joint agreement with Marvell to market within that space. We're actually very interested in that little device because Marvell has 30% of the worldwide share of chips that go into NAS devices, be it RAID or SATA controllers or wireless access points. And so we actually have a pretty good relationship with Marvell, and we support the plug computer. But just to be clear, we started with PCs because I didn't want to spend a huge amount of money trying to build something if I didn't know if it was going to work. So the idea was, why not use something that it exists and that I can leverage very easily to actually build something without spending a huge amount of capital doing it. Okay? Today, it's actually fairly difficult to install. I'm actually, I'll be completely honest, I'm actually amazed that actually so many people actually went through the pain of installing Amahi. But we will get there. We'll make it in such a way that people can actually buy it off the shelf. When we get an agreement with one of these companies, the idea is that people will simply order an Amahi server and will come pre-installed. You plug it on the wall and you're ready to go, just like a router. However, we're not Microsoft. It's a small company, and so what I have to think, and what you guys have to think actually, is as a students of computer science, is how can you do more with less? How can you leverage something that already exists? And this is actually one comment that I actually want to make to you guys, because today, more than any other time in the entire history of mankind, you can do things faster than ever before, cheaper than ever before, especially in computer science. You can basically, within a matter of 15 minutes, have server deploys that scale almost infinitely with Amazon infrastructure. You can deploy an application. If your application is popular, you can deploy an application very, very quickly. And if people like it, you can actually do very well with very, very little investment. What you have to understand is you have to understand the psychology of people sometimes. You have to understand what people want. In my case, I felt that people wanted a kind of like a central system for storing music, and so forth. And it turns out that many people around the world want that. Now, I didn't have a whole lot of money to actually put into building a hardware device, and so what I did was, why not let people use an old PC? We're not Microsoft. Why not let people use Linux that already exists? And it turns out that because it's open source, and I made the software open source, we started to get contributions. We now have a system that runs on thousands and thousands of servers all over the world in 24 languages, and we didn't really spend a whole lot of money testing whether the idea would work or not. We have an indication that the idea works. So now we started charging people for the most popular apps, and it turns out that people are paying for that because it's convenient. The most expensive app is $4.99, and the most expensive, we have 2 subscription plans, one from, $8 or $9, and the other one is $15 for, depending on the size of the cloud drive that you are getting. And people are actually interested in that because, for instance, in our case, once you have the system installed, you don't need to install clients all around the house. This is very important because, to be completely honest, my wife doesn't want to install any software. She doesn't care about the software. She's not a techie. She just wants to say, look, I move the file into that box, I drop it, and then I go to work and I can see the file from the office. I can download it. She doesn't have to struggle, even with a USB pen drive. There's many people who cannot really handle that in terms of, computer science. They're not computer scientists. They're not, someone in our business. So a little bit of part of the idea here is that you can actually make a difference, and you can make things today faster than at any point in time in the history of humankind, and cheaper. You can do it in a matter of minutes, today. It's very, very easy to do some of these things. I have a friend also here from the Polytechnic, from the Poly, who I met in a previous trip, and he told me one thing that kind of, really resonated with me, which is that being a somewhat technical person who was interested in the, technology and the arts, he felt like he wished he would live in the Renaissance. And then while we were talking, we really realized that we are living in a new Renaissance. I mean, there's in the last 40 years, I mean, we have generated an insane amount of data. You have amount to education, even online, really good education here. Actually, one thing I didn't realize until I left was how good my education here at the university was. And it allowed me to do very well, when I left. But today, I would be very excited. If I were your age, I would be so excited because things that I could never, ever do when I was in that position, you can do now at the drop of a hat. Very, very easy. Now go and do it. You have to have good ideas. You have to have some good ideas. And also, one thing that you have to be adventurous and not be afraid to try. Try one thing. If it doesn't work, maybe you'll learn. I had a business here in Gandia. It didn't quite work, and we sold it. We didn't really do very well, and we decided to move on and do something else. And looks like Amahi, it may work, right? Try again, different opportunities. So Plug computers are essentially an initiative from Marvell, and they have several partners. They have the one that I can recommend, there's Ionix, produces a model which is, I think it's $99, and you can get it probably, fairly quickly, from the US. That would work very well. There's newer models coming out all the time. There's a newer model from Ionix as well that has actually Wi-Fi, Zigbee, and as well Z-Wave. And so if you know what Zigbee is, it allows you to put different devices around the home. You can have switches. You can have network little alarms on windows to see if there's break-ins or that sort of thing, and you can actually develop applications with the plug very quickly. The plug has been available for the last, I think, year and a half, and you can actually buy it online. One from Ionix. There's another one called Global Scale, I believe is the other one. Builds more of a server type plug computer, but actually many people don't know this, but you can actually buy, if you go to some of these computer shops, you can buy things that have a plugged computer inside. It just doesn't advertise it as a plugged computer. For instance, a lot of the Seagate drives that are called home drives, they have a little cradle where they connect to the network, and they have a hard drive vertically inserted into it. That inside actually has a plugged computer. In all of France, there's millions of boxes that are called free box, which some people don't like because it comes from the operator, but it actually has a plugged computer inside, and you can actually develop some applications on it. Questions?
Well, there's another question because now actually the network home servers can offer as some features, but the thing is that the local networks are fast, but not the necessary fast to implement and to manage than we expected. There are users that doesn't want to be worried about the implementation details and the network thing. For example, there are examples, for example, the NAS server that the speed are around 1 meg per second, or maybe server processing speed is not good enough for this type of application. How can the new generation change the point of view around the performance?
So your question is about performance of NAS servers?
NAS servers and around the home servers.
The home network. Well, so I believe that in some cases, actually, Amahi running on Linux and running on Samba, if you know what Samba is, it has as good performance or better than Windows on the same hardware, or Windows Home Server on the same hardware. We've had some people doing comparisons and benchmarks, and we know that it has at least equal or better, performance. As far as performance of the hardware, that really depends on the manufacturer. We also had a relationship with Intel in the past where they explored the idea of launching Atom-based home servers. Obviously, Atom, even though is very high performance, it actually, in some cases, does not have as much what is known as I/O performance. In other words, for instance, the plugged computer actually has a very, very good I/O subsystem. And it can actually stream, in my case, I've been able to stream two 1080p streams to two clients simultaneously. Very high performance. But it all depends on the amount of hardware that you can put into it. Next generation of hardware devices, what in the business is known as retail devices, this industry is kind of going a little bit like the mobile phone in some ways, where sometimes if you subscribe to a service like Justel or whatever, you get a router from them. But sometimes that router is very, very basic, just like mobile phones. In the case of subscribing to a mobile service, you get a very, very basic phone, either for free or very, very inexpensively. But many people, what they do is they buy a retail device because they want to have the power of a real, iOS or Android or whatever, and that's bought essentially, retail. The NAS and router industry is kind of going that way. NAS devices, on one hand, are going to have more and more router functionality, and router devices are going to have more and more applications and more storage into them. One case actually is here in Spain is known as FON. Do you guys know FON? La Fonera. This is a device here in Spain. The same person who founded Justel, then founded FON, is a little device that can actually run and share some files. You can actually put some storage into it. You can actually run BitTorrent. You can run, the eMule and whatnot in it, right? And the advantage is that you can actually run whatever you want to run in the device. You then, you work on your client. You close your laptop. You go to work. You go to the university. Come back. the thing is been running 24/7. So the bottom line is there's a number of devices that are going to be in the product, and just like you can buy a very high powered device today, the highest end Android device or whatever, and you can buy a very low end. Some people are interested in our community. We've seen some people who are interested in very, very low power and being very, very quiet around the home. And we've seen people who have a basement and have a rack in the basement with 2 PCs and 24 terabytes of disk. So it's a very, very wide range. And I believe actually that there will be a pretty wide market for this. Some people will be what you would call media hoarders, people who accumulate and they don't like to, I just bought 2 years ago a video camera, and every time that we go out and we take pictures and so forth, you come back and you have 1 gigabyte of stuff. It's 1 gigabyte, and then another gigabyte the next weekend, and another gigabyte the next weekend. Is, these things, they have to be somewhere. So what we believe we offer is some software to manage all that. Now, the hardware, we're working on hardware partnerships. That is really our goal, to work with hardware partnerships. Like I said, it's kind of unbelievable that people are actually going through the huge pain of installing this themselves and then, buying, stuff from Amahi. So, in a way, it's a good validation that we're having from our community. And now we can go to hardware partners and say, hey, look, people are interested in this, and after you sell your device, we may be able to make a little bit of money from selling applications on that device. So there's quite a bit of a range of hardware that can go there. Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure. If you guys want to take a look at these strips, you can come by and take a look if you're interested. That's right.